What if everything you thought you knew about one of the best known religions of the world was just a carefully designed facade? What if behind the smiles, friendly, the suits impeccable, and the magazines that promise a paradise on earth, is there a power structure that is much more complex and dangerous than we imagine? Jehovah's Witnesses are recognized globally for their constant presence in the streets, knocking on doors, preaching in train stations, corners and squares. With a calm voice and persuasive tone, they announce that the end is near, only a few will survive, and that the salvation is linked to your organization. But what few know, and many prefer not to see, is that under that, on the surface, lies a rigid system of spiritual, psychological, and emotional control, which regulates every aspect of the lives of its members. Imagine for a moment a 10-year-old girl years in a hospital room. His face is pale, his pulse weak. The doctors are ready to act, but something stops. Her parents, devout witnesses, refuse to authorize a blood transfusion. It doesn't matter that medicine says it's the only way to save her. The doctrine says that is a sin, and while the seconds are running out, the little girl looks at her parents, searching for a sign of sympathy. But what she finds is resignation. Oran silently, convinced that they are obeying God. Finally, the heart monitor emits a high-pitched beep, and then silence. A silence that screams louder than any preaching. But that's just one story, one among thousands. Because this isn't just an extreme case or a decision, isolated. It is part of a network of beliefs and norms that profoundly affect the lives of millions of people around the world. That happens when a young man commits a sin and is brought before a judicial committee composed of 3 elders of the congregation. What happens when a woman dares to question the authority of her husband? And what fate awaits someone who decides to leave the faith? The answer is simple but devastating: isolation, rejection, fear, silence. This documentary does not seek to ridicule the faith nor attack the belief spiritual. Rather, it seeks to give voice to those who have been silenced, to shed light on what has been hidden, and to offer an honest and documented perspective on an organization that, despite its public image, keeps dark secrets and internal structures worthy of scrutiny. Join us on this journey. We will cross the veil. Let's listen testimonies real, review internal documents, and discover that there is behind the name Jehovah's Witnesses. Because when the faith becomes in control instrument, the truth becomes in an act of resistance. And it all begins here, with the silence that screams. To understand the magnitude of the control exercised by Jehovah's Witnesses, we must begin with one of the most controversial and lethal aspects of its doctrine, the absolute ban on blood transfusions. At first glance, it seems a matter of religious conviction. But when that conviction leads to deaths avoidable, especially in children, the line between faith and fanaticism becomes dangerously thin. The basis of this belief comes from an interpretation very specific to certain biblical passages, such as Acts 15:28-29, which commands abstaining from blood. For the most of the religions, this has a symbolic or ritual meaning. But for Jehovah's Witnesses, it is a literal command that admits of no exceptions. Not even in life or death situations. Members who accept a transfusion, even by accident or while unconscious, may be considered apostates or unrepentant sinners. This means they could be expelled from the congregation and, this means losing all contact with family and friends within the organization. The social and emotional punishment is so severe that many prefer die rather than risk that total disconnection. Stories like Alyssa's Walls, a young woman who saw die to his younger sister for refusing to receive blood during a medical complication, are more common than we imagine. Doctors around the world have reported cases in those that witness patients, even minors, rejected transfusions under family pressure or elderly supervision congregational. In some hospitals have been created special protocols to deal with these situations, which many times end in courts, fighting for the life of a minor against the will of their own parents. The organization has promoted bloodless medical alternatives as an ethical solution, but even specialists acknowledge that there are situations where there is no substitute viable. Severe bleeding, emergency surgeries, complicated births. In all these scenarios, refusal can be a death sentence. And yet thus, the leaders of the organization remain steadfast. In his publications, he congratulates those who remain loyal to the end, even if it means losing their lives. They are counted stories of modern martyrs with pride as examples of faithful obedience to Jehovah. But is it really loyalty? If it is chosen under coercion, fear and conditioning from the childhood, this doctrine has claimed lives. It has left empty, irreparable in families, and there is sowing eternal guilt in parents who, in his desire to be faithful, they saw to die to their children. Everything in name of a rigid, non-arguable, non-reformable interpretation. This isn't just another dogma, it's a deadly policy. And it's just the first crack of a much system deeper than absolute control. Because if an organization can decide about your blood, what else can it control? While millions of Jehovah's Witnesses, they spend hours preaching from house to house, convinced that they are in the organization true, there is something that is not mentioned in your post's officials, nor in their assemblies, nor not even in their biblical studies. The hundreds of cases of child sexual abuse that were hidden for decades under the cloak of religious silence. In 2015, the Australian Royal Commission into Responses Institutional Child Sexual Abuse revealed something chilling. More than 1,000 cases of sexual abuse within the community of Jehovah's Witnesses in Australia, and none had been reported to the police. All were handled internally by secret judicial committees, without intervention of the authorities, without professional psychological support, and, what more serious, without justice for the victims. How is it possible that an organization that proclaims itself morally superior would allow something like this? The answer lies in a doctrinal rule, known as the two-proof rule. According to this internal policy, if someone accuses another member of a crime, included sexual abuse, but there is no second eyewitness of the fact, the case cannot be considered valid. In other words, the word of a victim, especially if it is a child, it is not enough. This interpretation, based in passages from the Old Testament, creates a protection gap that leaves the aggressors with impunity and silences the victims. Worse still, many, sometimes, abusers remain within the congregation, attending the same meetings, exchanging glances with their victims as if nothing had happened past. The victims, for their part, are frequently pressured to forgive the aggressor, to not speak ill of him. Brother, already trust in Jehovah to do justice in his due time. This spiritualization of trauma not only aggravates the psychological damage, but perpetuates a system where the prestige of the organization is worth more than the security of a child. Several ex-seniors have publicly testified about how we're trained to handle these cases without involving secular authorities. Some recognize today that they participated without grasp entirely in a web of concealment motivated by the fear of scandal and desire to protect the reputation of the name of Jehovah. And yet, when the victims they try speak, are branded as apostates, disloyal, manipulated by Satan. Their pain is invalidated, your history silenced, his search for justice treated as a threat. The organization not only failed in protecting the innocent, he failed in his most basic moral duty: to listen, to protect, to heal, because when it is put before the institutional loyalty to human life, lines are crossed that neither the faith can justify. This is the true face of silence, an institutionalized, theological, calculated silence, a silence that hurts, that wounds, that kills. Imagine that, from a day to the next. Your mother stops talking to you. Your brothers avoid you the look. Your lifelong friends cross the street so as not to greet you. You have not committed any crime. You didn't hurt anyone. You just asked an awkward question, expressed a doubt, or decided to walk away. In the universe of Jehovah's Witnesses, that's enough to be expelled. And with the expulsion arrives the most brutal punishment, the absolute isolation, even on the part of your own family. This process is known as disassociation or expulsion. According to the organization, it is a loving measure intended to protect the congregation of sin. But in the practice, it is such a powerful tool of emotional control that it breaks the whose will the suffer. The message is clear. Either you submit or you disappear. The psychological impact is devastating. Young people who are barely discovering his identity are cut off from their parents. Wives who decide to leave the faith, they lose all ties with their husbands and children. Elderly parents, they die without hearing again the voice of their expelled children. There is no hugs, no goodbyes, just silence. The Watchtower, the body ruler of Jehovah's Witnesses, defends this practice using Bible verses such as 1 Corinthians 5:11, which commands not to mix with whose name is brother and is a fornicator or idolater. But the interpretation they make of these texts goes far beyond what any community traditional Christian would consider acceptable. In your system, love is conditional, acceptance is linked to the obedience, and the family to the unconditional loyalty to the organization. Many former members, they relate the pain of experiencing grief in life. That is, losing loved ones while still are alive. Some fall in severe depression, others they commit suicide. And all this occurs silently, without the society I noticed it, because from the outside, the witnesses continue seeming a united, exemplary group full of Christian love. But that love has conditions, and the first is the obedience blind. Some they try to return only to recover their loved ones. They undergo long and humiliating processes to be readmitted. They accept the guilt. They pretend repentance. They renounce their inner freedom. All for a call from mom, for a message from a brother, for a coffee with a childhood friend. This kind of punishment leaves no visible marks, but it tears you apart from within. It's the kind of emotional violence that isn't shouted out, but is felt every day, days. A system that transforms the keen in control currency and the family in a spiritual battlefield. Because when an organization forces you to choose between the truth and love, is not faith what you are offering. It is submission. In the most of the homes, it is celebrated when a son enters the university. It is a symbol of progress, of intellectual freedom, of new horizons. But in the world of Jehovah's Witnesses, the higher education is not a goal. It's a threat. From the platforms of their assemblies and publications offices, the organization has been clear. Does not recommend, neither supports the studies university students. According to they, seeking an academic career leads to the arrogance, weakens the faith, and puts the young man in contact with worldly and dangerous influences. It is insisted that it is better to focus in modest jobs that allow more time for service to Jehovah. The result, thousands of young witnesses give up their dreams, professionals. They reject scholarships, drop out of college, and limit themselves to low-skilled jobs, all for fear of disappointing their families and the congregation. Instead of investing in their future, they are encouraged to be a regular pioneer, dedicating 70 hours per month to the preaching. His identity is not formed through the critical thinking, but of the repetition, doctrinal. And it's not just about racing, it's about the way it looks. Knowledge. Read books unrelated to the organization can be considered suspicious. Watch documentaries, research religious history, or study psychology can raise alerts. Because in a system based in absolute truths, the doubt is dangerous. Thinking on your own is literally rebellion. Several former members they relate how his intellectual concerns were repressed from the childhood. Natural questions about the evolution, among others religions or about the history of the humanity, were quickly dismissed as Satan's traps. Even professions such as medicine, philosophy or the right are seen with distrust, since they expose the young person to ideas contrary to Jehovah. The irony is that while discourage the education, leaders publish magazines, direct complex administrative structures, and impose sophisticated legal rules to protect the organization. But to the member common, it is teaches not to question, not to investigate, to trust blindly in it, faithful and discreet slave, as they call themselves the leaders. This war against the critical thinking is not accidental, it's strategic. Because the less a person knows, the fewer tools they have, has to question. The less you compare, the less you doubt. And in a closed environment, that means more obedience, more submission, more control. Freedom begins with the thought. But in Jehovah's Witnesses, thinking is prohibited. And when an organization fears knowledge so much, it's because it knows that if its members they begin to think, they will begin also to wake up. Childhood. It should be a stage of discovery, play, exploration of the world and free construction of identity. But for the children raised within Jehovah's Witnesses, the childhood comes accompanied by an invisible, heavy and deeply formative load, the constant fear of displeasing God. Since the first years, they are teachers that the outside world is ruled by Satan, that anyone who is not part of his organization is doomed, that people of the world, schoolmates, teachers, neighbors, even family members, are an influence dangerous that can keep them away from the salvation. They are encouraged to distrust, to isolate themselves, to look with suspect everything that does not come from Jehovah as official channel. To the 3-4 years, already participate in long meetings where they must be silent, taking notes, listening to complex speeches on topics such as Armageddon, the total obedience, sexual purity. To that age, many already repeat by heart what they are expected to say, not because understand, but because they have learned that questioning is not an option. And then arrives the decisive moment, the baptism. Although the organization does not set an official minimum age, it encourages children to be baptized as soon as possible. Some it do at 10, 11, 12 years old, an act that, in others' religions, it is considered symbolic. Here it represents a lifelong legal and spiritual commitment. From that moment on, any sin committed will be treated as adult disobedience, and any doubt, like betrayal. Imagine being a child and know that if you decide to leave the religion, you could lose your parents, your brothers, to all your loved ones. That expressing a contrary opinion can take you to isolation. Ask for help out of the congregation is synonymous with spiritual weakness. It's not just indoctrination, it's emotional programming. Children's textbooks are carefully designed to generate guilt, fear, and conformity. They use striking illustrations of the end of the world, scenes of destruction massive, where only the faithful survive. It is reinforced the idea to think about on your own is dangerous. What to read. Critical information is eating food contaminated by Satan. And while others' children celebrate birthday, enjoy the Christmas or participate on school holidays, little witnesses learn to reject everything that does not come from their faith. Not by conviction, but by repetition, by fear, by need for approval. Many former adult members recount how, when leaving the organization, they felt they had never had a real childhood, that every decision they made was conditioned, that every thought was leaked by the doctrine, and that his identity had been shaped not by what they were, but by what they should be. Because when the doctrine comes before the consciousness, the childhood becomes in a prison invisible. In the speeches, Jehovah's Witnesses, they talk about spiritual equality between men and women, but in the practice, the woman occupies a clearly subordinate, defined, limited role, and many sometimes silent. Since we were little girls, They learn that their role within the organization is marked by the modesty, the obedience, and the subjection to the male. They are teachers that the man is the head of the home, and that Jehovah has established that order for your own well-being. The virtuous woman, according to his doctrine, is that which does not question, does not lead, does not contradict. It is that which supports from the shadows with humility and in silence. No matter how intelligent, prepared, or capable a woman is within the congregation, will never be able to exercise spiritual authority. She cannot be an elder. She cannot lead Bible studies in the presence of men, nor make relevant decisions within the organizational structure. Its function is to assist, support, and accept without arguing. In marriage, this is accentuated even more. The wife must respect the head, that is, her husband, even if he doesn't agree with her decisions. She is expected to be submissive, non-confrontational, accepting your destiny as part of the divine order. And if her husband makes mistakes, her duty is to pray, not to correct, to be silent, not to protest. Cases of women who suffer psychological abuse or even physical abuse within marriage and who seek aid in the elderly usually end up in disappointment. Unless there is clear evidence of sexual immorality, divorce is not permitted. It is advised to hold on, pray more, or wait for Jehovah act. In others' words, resignation disguised as spirituality. Even in the parenting, witness mothers have a narrow range of action. Although they are usually them who spend more time they pass with the children, the decisions, doctrinal, educational, and disciplinary, are supervised or directly dictated by the men of the family or the elders of the congregation. The message is clear: you can raise, but you can't lead. Many former members they relate as lived years, integers feeling nullified, forced to dress, speak, think, and act in a way that does not represented. Some even suffered severe identity and self-esteem crises, never feeling sufficient within the mold that is imposed on them. Because within this structure, the A woman is valuable only if she obeys. But the obedience is not love, and the submission is not respect. When a faith demands that one half of the humanity to be silent so that others speak, what you are building is not a community. It is a sacred hierarchy, where only a few have a voice. And when silence becomes in virtue, the injustice disguises itself as devotion. For decades, the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses, it worked as a closed ecosystem. They controlled what its members they read, listened, and believed. But then something came that they couldn't stop: internet. With the expansion of the network, the information stopped being a privilege and became a right. Thousands of former members, they began to share their stories, their doubts, their complaints. Internal documents and secret manuals were leaked. Elderly, recordings of meetings confidential. What was previously inaccessible was just a click away. And the response of the organization was immediate. Warning after warning against the danger of external information. In his speeches and publications, he began to demonize any content that does not come from their channel's officials. It is said that researching on the internet about the organization is like playing with fire, or worse still, as listen the voice of Satan. They are teachers the members who called apostates, that is, former witnesses who criticize the organization, are liars, manipulators, and enemies of Jehovah. It doesn't matter if what they say is supported by documents, statistics, or evidence. If it doesn't come of the faithful and discreet slave, is a trap of the devil. This mentality has created a powerful psychological barrier. Many members they don't even dare to search terms like Jehovah's Witnesses on Google. They fear they are committing an act of spiritual betrayal. Some even erase your browsing history after seeing something critical, even if they were just curious. But for others, the internet was the start of awakening. People who for years had lived with silent doubts found communities of support, similar testimonies, answers they never dared to formulate out loud. They discovered that they were not alone, that there was thousands more like them. That their discomfort was not rebellion, it was awareness, and that's what he fears most. The organization, the loss of the monopoly of the true. Because once someone starts investigating on your own, to contrast sources, to question absolute narratives, there is no turning back. Controlled doctrine crumbles. In recent years, the body ruler have reinforced their digital presence. They have created websites, apps, channels officials, trying to compete in her same ground that they previously despised. But its contents continue being one way, filtered, carefully edited. There is no room for dialogue, criticism, or honest questioning. There is only answers pre-designed. And while they try adapt, more young witnesses explore secretly what they was prohibited. Every video watched, every forum read, every testimony heard, it is a planted seed. Because when the truth is not afraid of being tested, it flourishes. But when needs prohibitions to sustain itself, reveals its fragility. The internet is not the enemy of the kingdom. It is the enemy of silence. To understand the power that the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses has over his faithful, you have to look at one of the more pillars, ancient and persistent of its theology, the prophecy of the end of the world. Since its inception, this apocalyptic expectation has been the driving force behind the urgency, the obedience, and the fear. The story starts in the 19th century, when Charles Taze Russell, founder of the movement, predicted that the end would arrive in 1914. When that year passed without Armageddon reinterpreted the date, it was not the end visible, but the beginning of a government invisible of Christ in the heavens. From there, they would come other dates, 1925, then 1975, each with promises, preparations, and a growing tension between the faithful. In 1975, the expectation was so high that thousands of witnesses left their jobs, sold properties, and dedicated all their time to full-time service. It was said that the millennium would begin that year, but the year ended, and nothing happened. Again, the disappointment was disguised as a misunderstanding. It was not the fault of the organization, but of the members who had misunderstood. This pattern was repeated over and over again. When a prophecy fails, adjusts the doctrine. When time passes, the meaning is redefined. Thus, the end, it is always close, but it never arrives. And yet, the fear remains. Armageddon is presented as an imminent, inevitable, and selective event. Only those who survive will be who are within the organization. All the others, unbelieving friends, neighbors, relatives, will die. This vision had generated a collective spiritual psychosis, where every earthquake, every war, every pandemic is interpreted as a sign of the end. The children grow, believing that they might not reach adulthood. Adults who will never grow old. It is postponed life, the dreams, the studies, the projects personal, because everything will be destroyed very soon. Thus, the future becomes hostage to a promise that is never kept. And so more disturbing is that despite these false predictions, the loyalty is maintained. Because the fear is an invisible cage, because when your eternal salvation depends on obeying those who control the narrative, questioning becomes in sin. Today, with the access to the information and the awakening of thousands of former members, more and more people are checking those prophecies failed with others' eyes. They wonder, how can an organization that makes mistakes so many times continue to claim divine authority? The answer is in the psychological structure of the system. The organization does not need its prophecies to come true. It only needs its members to believe that they could be fulfilled in any time. Because when the end is always at the around the corner, the present is filled with urgency, and the control is strengthened. After exploring every corner dark of this structure, after listening silenced voices, review doctrines that kill, see broken families, manipulated childhoods, women silent, hidden abuse, frustrated dreams and sleeping consciences, an inevitable question arises, what now? that we do with everything we discovered. Many, they will say that it is just another religion, that each group has its norms, its rules, its way of seeing the world. But Jehovah's Witnesses are not simply a congregation. They are a closed, self-referential system where the individual freedom is replaced by obedience collective, and where the spirituality is used, sometimes, as a tool of emotional control. Who achieve getting out of this system is not it do without scars. The process is slow and painful. It involves rebuilding your identity from scratch, learning to think without guilt, loving unconditionally, living without fear. It is looking at the world with others' eyes and understand that the truth does not need threats to sustain themselves. And yet, getting out is only the first step. What follows is even more important: speaking, telling, bearing witness. Because silence is the fertile ground where things grow, the abuses, and when an organization punishes the voice, the doubt, the difference, the only thing that can break that power is the true. More and more ex-members are breaking the pact of silence. They are talking on social networks, in books, in documentaries. They are denouncing, informing, tending the hand to those who still they're inside. Because it's not enough to escape. You have to turn on the lights. In Path. And you, who are watching this video, may not be a Jehovah's Witness. Maybe you have never touched one of their magazines, or you spoke with they in the street. But now you know. Now you've seen what many they prefer to ignore. And that gives you a responsibility, not to remain indifferent. Maybe you know someone trapped on this network, someone who lives with fear, what doubts silently, smiling toward outside but crumbles inside. To that person, this video can arrive as a whisper of hope, like a crack in the wall, as proof that there is life beyond of the control. Because in the end, it's not just about a religion, it's about freedom, about dignity, about humanity, about the ability of every human being to choose his spiritual path without coercion, without emotional blackmail, without threats disguised as love. The truth hurts, yes, but it also liberates. And now that you know what you are going to do with she,